When Honda resurrected the Passport name a few years ago, it was hailed as Honda's answer to the Jeep Grand Cherokee and the Toyota 4Runner. But I've always thought of the Passport maybe as more of a pragmatic alternative rather than a direct competitor to those off-road options, even though a full third of Passports sold in North America currently wear the Trail Sport badge. For 2024, the Passport has received a bit of a refresh, some changes for the Trail Sport trim, which we're going to talk about, and of course, a little bit of an interior tweak as well. This generation Passport has long sold on its rugged good looks, and that continues for 2024. Honestly, the core looks haven't changed too much for this model year. Today I'm driving the Black Edition, which is the new top-end trim, and it does get a unique grille up front. We also get a bit of a grille tweak for the Trail Sport trim, but the basics of this vehicle remain the same as the 2023 model year vehicle. So the headlights are essentially the same. We get standard front and rear parking sensors, which is a nice touch. The Trail Sport trim becomes more off-road capable with added underbody protection and the addition of all-terrain tires standard on that Trail Sport trim as well. But the Passport is an intrinsically different vehicle from the Grand Cherokee and 4Runner in terms of off-road capability, and that's just fine for me because it actually means this is a better family car. The design of the Pilot is inherently more space efficient than the rear-wheel drive competition. At 190.5 inches long, this is 3 inches shorter than a Jeep Grand Cherokee, an inch shorter than the 4Runner, but it has significantly more room on the inside, more legroom, and significantly more cargo room, especially than the 4Runner. When you take a look at the Grand Cherokee, it has a long hood profile up front that really isn't giving you any extra space on the inside. The Volkswagen Atlas is about 5 inches longer than this, and I am talking about the Atlas Cross Sport. That does result in a slightly larger passenger cabin, but the cargo area is roughly the same size. Versus something like the Subaru Outback, the Passport has a much boxier profile, and that results in more headroom and a much bigger cargo area in the back, but also a higher load-on height if you want to put stuff on the roof. Subaru Outback really comes to about there, and that should give you an idea of how much more room we find in here. To create the Passport, essentially Honda took the previous generation Pilot and they hacked about 6 inches off the back, deleted the third row, and then gave us all that space back here for cargo capacity. Most vehicles over $50,000 have full LED lights on the outside, but the Passport makes do with last year's taillights still. Changes to the rear end are very minor for 2024, and they really just relate to the lower bumper trim and the fact that this is the Black Edition, so it has the blacked out badging and the blacked out logos there as well. These are partial LED taillights, so the turn signals are incandescent, but the brake lights are LEDs there. And then down here at the bottom of the bumper, we find the reverse lights. Those are also incandescent. The dual exhaust tips, though, those are a pretty nice touch. While we're back here, I should mention that I love the fact that Honda still gives us a very vertical hatch in the Passport. You can see that it does lean in a little bit towards the top of the opening, but it's big, it's square, and the hatch definitely goes up high enough that taller folks probably won't bop their heads. As with the rest of the Honda lineup in North America, the Passport has a ton of driver assist tech standard. Radar adaptive cruise control, autonomous emergency braking, their aggressive lane centering program, blind spot monitoring, rear cross traffic detection, and front and rear parking sensors are standard on every trim. That's definitely more standard safety tech than you find in any of the competition in this segment. Under the hood, we find the same 3.5-liter V6 that we found last year and the same 9-speed automatic transmission. Some people may be disappointed by the 9-speed. I know it's not quite as much fun as the 10-speed, but Honda has made significant improvements over the years with the software on this transmission, and now I would say most folks probably won't notice too much of a difference between this and the 10-speed in the new Pilot. Horsepower comes in at 280, torque at 262, and the super handling all-wheel drive system is standard. Yes, I know that Honda calls it IVTM4, but it's essentially the same thing that Acura calls super handling all-wheel drive, and it's definitely an asset to the way that the Passport handles. It also allows it to have limited slip functionality on the rear axle, and that's one of the big advantages that this has over something like a Subaru Outback or a Volkswagen Atlas, or even, honestly, the base versions of something like a Jeep Grand Cherokee. Fuel economy, however, is pretty similar to the competition at 21 miles per gallon combined. If you were hoping for a hybrid in this segment, you're going to have to wait until Toyota gives us the Crown Signia. Yes, that looks more like a Subaru Outback than, honestly, some versions of the Subaru Outback, but they claim that it's actually going to be a direct competitor to the Passport. If you didn't care for the seating position in the Passport last year, they haven't done anything to change your mind here. So even though this is the top-end trim, the Black Edition has now replaced the Elite trim. We still don't have 4-way adjustable lumbar support, but we do have 2-position memory over there, power driver's seat, and a tilt telescopic steering column with a decent range of motion. You also have a very, very upright seating position, as you might have guessed by the boxy profile of the vehicle. I can lift this driver's seat really quite far off the ground, give this more of a pickup truck-like driving position, and still have maybe an inch and a half of headroom left in a relatively comfortable position. That shouldn't be too surprising, of course, because this is the basis for the Honda Ridgeline as well, Honda's mid-sized pickup truck, and that definitely has that sort of driving position available. You could also drop this seat all the way down to the ground and get gobs and gobs of headroom, so if you're a taller person and you like sitting in a more reclined seating position, it should be absolutely no problem to get comfortable in the Passport. Rear seat legroom is a solid reason to upgrade from something like a RAV4 or a CR-V into a Passport. With that front seat comfortably adjusted for me at 6 feet tall, it would be pretty darn easy to put a rear-facing child seat behind. As you can see, there is plenty of room there. Definitely enough clearance to be safe. We also have the option, if you're shorter, to maximize your cargo capacity because this second row bench has basically been lifted right out of that old Pilot as well. There aren't too many 2-row vehicles out there with sliding back seats that really helps maximize that cargo capacity and really makes this more practical as well. And there's kind of another interesting touch, which is if I remove this from the latch anchors, and that is that we actually get a center latch anchor. Now, you're not supposed to use this with an outboard seat, but it does mean that you can latch anchor certain child seats right here in the middle, which could definitely be more convenient for some families. Now, of course, make sure you read the instruction manual, make sure that your child seat is designed for use in this center seat position, and the vehicle manual itself agrees with whatever you're trying to put with those latch anchors. But it is kind of an unusual touch that we don't really see in too many 2-row vehicles. The eagle-eyed among you may have noticed that it seems like Honda has performed some sort of cargo space miracle with the Passport. It now says on the spec sheet that we have 50.5 cubic feet of cargo capacity rather than the approximately 40 cubic feet that we found back here last year. I hate to tell you, there has been no miracle. It is exactly the same cargo space. It's just that Honda seems to be measuring it differently. There's actually no required standard for how companies measure cargo space, so it's just left to the various companies to decide that on their own. And I think what's going on here is that Honda may have changed standards, but also they're now including all of the underfloor storage area, which is quite extensive in the Passport. It's probably not 10 cubic feet, but there is a reasonable amount of storage in these divided storage wells under the floor, and you could even toss some stuff right inside the middle of that spare tire. This is not a full-size spare like you will find on some of the off-road oriented vehicles, like of course that 4Runner or the Grand Cherokee, but thankfully we do have a spare, and you can remove this cargo tray if you'd rather put some larger items all around down there. In a somewhat surprising move, Honda has kept the power folding second row seats from the Pilot, so you can just drop them down easily from the cargo area, roll that luggage right on in there. As we take a look around the interior, keep in mind that we are in the new Black Edition trim, but you will find a lot of what you're going to see here actually in the EXL trim as well, because leather upholstery is standard in that model. We have a pretty standard sized moonroof just over the driver and front passengers' heads, as you can see. This model gets those manual rear window shades as well. We get height adjustable shoulder belts for the driver and front passenger and 2-way adjustable headrests. Black Edition embroidered on those front seat backs, as well as some red stitching to help accent things out. And here you can see that we also get, from this angle, it's probably a little easier to see, that in the perforations of the seat back and seat bottom cushion, we actually have some red accenting that definitely gives this a very distinct vibe, I would say, from a distance, but it's pretty subtle. From this angle, you can see it's actually pretty difficult to tell that that's also going on the front seats. Again, the design of this interior is basically the same as before, so a lot of the same shapes and materials are going on the front. The doors are a combination of soft and hard touch materials, so we have soft touch plastics in the upper section of the door, harder plastics down lower on the door. Here's a better look at the storage going on in the front doors. The driver's door is pretty much the same as that front passenger door. Moving out from there, you can see that the dashboard style is pretty familiar if you've been in the last generation Pilot. We have some injection molded plastics up top that are soft touch, hard plastics down lower in the dash, and then this shiny black plastic trim strip. I am worried that that might end up scratching. This vehicle only had 25 miles on it when it was delivered to us, so definitely keep that in mind if you plan on keeping your car for a while. The bin-style glove compartment was just a little bit too small to hold a 12-inch tablet computer, but I was able to squeeze an 11-inch tablet inside. In the middle of the dashboard, we find one of Honda's current infotainment systems, but this is not the more modern one that we find in the Honda Pilot. I am a little bit disappointed that they didn't decide to graft on the Pilot's infotainment system here. Obviously, it supports factory navigation, Apple CarPlay, we have a physical power and volume knob there. This is going to do everything you need it to do, but it's not going to look quite as modern or quite as flashy as what we find in some of the competition. Below that screen, we find the controls for the dual zone automatic climate control. Yes, there is a third rear zone. Definitely a handy touch for people that have folks in the back on a regular basis. There is a small storage slot here. Larger slots down here that are new for 2024. Heated and ventilated seat controls there, as you can see. We find one USB interface for the system, a USB-C charge port, and then a space for 2 smartphones, but only 1 wireless charger there. This has the push button shifter that we've seen from Honda for a while. So drive is this button right there. Reverse is that button right there. And neutral is the button in between with park right up front. This is the drive mode selector. This allows us to choose between normal, snow, mud, and sand modes. We then have a button to disable the auto start-stop system, more of that shiny black plastic going on here, and 2 supersized cup holders. They have been made larger so that way they can accommodate larger drinks. And this center console has grown as well. So if I open it up, you'll notice that the storage area inside is roughly the same size, but getting to that storage area is definitely easier than it was in the past, and the armrest is also more comfortable. Moving over to the driver's side, we have a partial LCD instrument cluster design. So you can see we have an LCD in the middle of everything and then 2 physical gauges on either side. This doesn't have quite as modern of a look as we find in some of the competition, but it is definitely easy to read and fairly attractive. Out from there, we have a 4-spoke steering wheel, basically the same one that we find in the Ridgeline. It has perforated leather on the outboard sides and then regular leather on the bottom and on the top. Over here, we find the controls for the infotainment system, volume up, down, track forward, backward, etc. And on this side, we find the controls for the radar adaptive cruise control. All right, it's now time to get the Passport out on the road. 0 to 60 happened in 6.5 seconds. The V6 does sound just a little bit gruff over about 5,000 RPM or so, but it really motivates the Passport nicely. 6.5 seconds is definitely a solid score, and that is going to be ahead of entries like the Jeep Grand Cherokee with its naturally aspirated 3.6-liter V6. That's because the Grand Cherokee is a reasonable amount heavier, and this is certainly going to be swifter than something like the Toyota 4Runner. The 4Runner with that older V6 engine and the 5-speed automatic transmission is just not terribly modern. The 9-speed automatic transmission in the Passport has been controversial, so we should definitely take a moment to talk about that. This is a German-designed and engineered transmission. It's made by ZF. They're the same company that makes 8-speed rear-wheel drive transmissions for everything from Rolls-Royces to Jeeps and pretty much everything in between. This transmission has some really novel design features. It has a very unusual clutch setup inside that allows it to be small, lightweight, very efficient, and give you an incredible ratio spread. This is definitely the reason that we get that fast 6.5 second 0 to 60, because we get a very aggressive first gear. It's also the reason that the Passport is pretty efficient out on the open highway, because it has a number of overdrive gears, not just one. On the downside, due to the design of this transmission, certain shifts can feel unusual, and probably the one you're going to notice the most is when you go from the lower ratios where you're driving around 30 or 40 miles an hour to, say, the higher ratios where you're driving around 50 or 60 miles an hour. If you floor it, you have to wait for it, then it shifts. It feels like there's a bit of a delay in some of those shifts, but if you're already in one of those lower gears and you floor it again, then that shift is pretty darn quick, just because of the way the clutch packs are designed in this transmission. I don't find it to be a problem. I think you'll get used to it, and true reliability has actually been pretty decent for this transmission. If transmission shift feel is a big deal to you, you might want to take a look at the Pilot, because of course it does not use this transmission, and shift quality is going to be better. Let's get back to the numbers now. Stopping from 60 miles an hour back to 0 took just 117 feet. That's a solid score for this segment, thanks mainly to the lighter curb weight we find in the Passport versus something like a Jeep Grand Cherokee. Light curb weight really helps everything when it comes to vehicle dynamics. Acceleration, stopping distance, handling, etc. All of that is improved, and we certainly see that in here. Handling is also improved thanks to the iVTM4 all-wheel drive system that is standard. The IVTM4 system is novel in a few different ways. The first thing is that this system is more aggressive and more capable of sending power to the rear axle. So this can send more power to the back wheels than, say, a Subaru Outback, or actually any modern Subaru with the CVT. And it can do that without the front wheels slipping. It does that by actually making the rear wheels spin just ever so slightly faster than the fronts, and under limited conditions, it can send 70% of engine power and torque to the rear wheels. You'll really notice that when you floor it, especially from a standstill, or when you're in a corner. So for instance, if I slow down here, and then I floor it, wait for that transmission of course, and then go around this corner, you'll really notice that the rear end is pushing around a little bit. It's not going to feel like a Ford Mustang or anything like that, but you will definitely notice that yaw motion enabled by the torque vectoring all-wheel drive system and the ability of this system to send more power to the rear and send all of that rear power to a single rear wheel. It means that this is an awful lot of fun to drive harder out on your favorite winding mountain road. Now, as I've noted before, the effect of this system is that you will find yourself going an awful lot faster uphill than you will downhill, because going downhill, the torque vectoring is not doing anything for you. But this is an incredible all-wheel drive system from a design perspective. Because of the way this system functions and is laid out, it also allows the rear axle to have essentially a limited slip mechanical function, something that you don't find, again, in a Subaru Outback or a Santa Fe, etc. And you don't even necessarily find in every Jeep Grand Cherokee or every 4Runner. Even in rear-wheel drive-based SUVs with a transfer case, if you don't get an e-locker in the rear or a limited slip in the rear, it's basically going to have an open differential, just like all of those other entries out there, like the Subaru, like the Hyundai Santa Fe, etc. And that means that this system is a bit more capable of helping you out in sticky situations. It's also going to feel more planted on snow, ice, etc. Now, one thing we don't know for 2024 is whether or not Honda has improved the cooling for the IVTM4 system. That has been a bit of a complaint in the past, is that yes, you can send a lot of power to the rear, but sometimes it can overheat if you're really challenging that system for long periods of time. Of course, if you let it cool down, you're just fine, but that could be a bit of a bummer if you're in a sticky situation and then you have to wait for your vehicle to cool down a bit. For most drivers, overheating is absolutely not going to be a concern, because it's really only going to happen if you're off-roading for hours and hours and hours, and you're on trails that are a lot more technical than the average trail you'd be finding at a national park or something like that. When it comes to the handling score and the ride score, I'm certainly going to give the Passport an A. I think that Honda found the exact right balance for 2024 here. Handling is fantastic, bearing in mind that this is within this category, so 4Runner, Grand Cherokee, Outback, Santa Fe, maybe Sorento, pretty much everything in this mid-sized, mid-priced two-row category. Obviously the Volkswagen Atlas Cross Sport in there as well. This definitely feels more nimble than average thanks to the lower curb weight, the IVTM4 system, etc., and the fact that it's a unibody SUV. And that's certainly not something that we find in the 4Runner. The 4Runner's handling ability is definitely very, very old school, let's say. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to test the updated Trail Sport trim. It gets revised dampers, and of course it gets the all-terrain tires, which are likely going to combine to give it a better quality ride on rougher surfaces like this gravel road that we're on here. The last time that I drove the Trail Sport, that would be the pre-refresh model, I noted that the suspension was just a little bit too firm if you really did plan on spending hours and hours on a rougher trail. And that's certainly something that Honda had us do in that Trail Sport model. After about 2 to 3 hours, my neck was definitely starting to feel the effects of that firmer suspension tune. So that has been revised for 2023. Back out on the paved road, this Black Edition does an excellent job of soaking up large and small road imperfections, potholes, speed bumps, etc., without the suspension becoming upset. And that's exactly what you want if you're out on a fun winding mountain road like this. At 50 miles an hour, I measured 70 decibels in here, making this a little bit quieter than the last Passport we tested, although I do get a little bit more wind noise through the side glass than I would like. In terms of fuel economy, over the past 200 miles, we've been averaging 20.5 mpg, which definitely puts this ahead of the 4Runner and most versions of the Grand Cherokee. However, keep in mind that there are some hybrid entries in this segment. We have the plug-in hybrid Grand Cherokee. It is pretty darn expensive, though. We have a hybrid Santa Fe. We, of course, have a hybrid Highlander as well. The Highlander, yes, it's a two-row vehicle, but it's a small third row, so a lot of folks keep that third row folded, and with it down, you'll get about the same kind of storage space we find back there in the Passport. We, of course, are going to get a new Santa Fe, and it's going to offer a hybrid system in the US as well. Bottom line, at least for the moment with the Passport, is that this is still a solid amount of fun. I know that people have been complaining about this 9-speed automatic transmission for a while, but this is the kind of family hauler where when the kids are not in the back, you can definitely have a surprising amount of fun out on winding mountain roads like this. You can certainly drive the Passport harder than you'd think, and an awful lot harder than you'd ever be able to drive a 4Runner on this road surface. Yes, it's not a rock crawler. It's not going to do the kind of off-roading that a 4Runner can do, but most folks don't do that. And if you want extra capability, if you want a lot of fun, and you want something that's practical and reliable and efficient, then you definitely want to take a look at the Passport. I am, however, still a little bit disappointed that this interior hasn't had a more thorough refresh. I would have loved to see them integrate a new full LCD instrument cluster and maybe a bigger infotainment system in the center of the dash as well.
Since we know pricing, we can actually take a deep dive into the Passport's pricing for 2024. It's going to start at $43,365. That is a pretty steep base price, but there's a lot of standard equipment, and that's indicated by the base trim being EXL, not LX or EX. So we get all-wheel drive, leather, the moonroof, all of the active safety tech I mentioned earlier, the power hatch, front and rear parking sensors, heated front seats, and seat memory standard in the Passport. As far as base model goes, that is a very, very good value. It's probably the best value in this segment. Not the cheapest, but certainly the best value. From there, we go up to the Trail Sport trim, which is going to be about 33% of the volume. That starts at $45,875, and it's going to give you the off-road styling and the extra off-road capability that you'd expect. Extra underbody protection, we now get the all-terrain tires standard, and the retuned off-road suspension for 2024. I was driving the Black Edition, which is the most expensive version of the Passport, and at $49,345, it is definitely not inexpensive, I would say. We get the extra features like the sunshades, ventilated seats, the heated steering wheel, and the premium audio in that model. The price tag at the top end seems high, but not as high as some of the competition we're going to go through here in a moment. So first, let's dive through the most direct competitor according to Honda and Toyota, interestingly enough, and that would be the Toyota 4Runner. I think the rational cross-shop here is not that the Passport is as off-road capable as a 4Runner, because I'll tell you right now, it absolutely is not. But I could see a decent number of shoppers just going, do I need the body-on-frame vehicle? Should I take the one that's more fuel efficient, a little bit better driving, etc.? That's a rational comparison. The 4Runner starts less expensive, $41,850, but the limited trim goes all the way up to $55,895. The 4Runner has been a mind-blowing runaway success, really, for Toyota, because last year they sold 121,000 of these. Honda only sold 41,000 Passports, so about 3 times the number of 4Runners went out the door versus Honda Passports, and I have always been surprised by that number because the 4Runner ostensibly is very old and feels very basic. The interior style is from another decade, practically another century, actually. The 4-liter V6 is pretty old, and it is one of the few vehicles in America to get a 5-speed transmission. It's a 5-speed automatic. Yes, that's not a typo. It's not a 6. It is a 5. And that's why the 4Runner feels sluggish. It feels old. It also is a body-on-frame SUV, one of the very few remaining in this segment. So very much like the 4-door Wrangler, I guess you could say, in that respect. So it's going to have a very different feel on the road to something like the Passport. Ride, handling, acceleration, braking, all of those kind of driving dynamics things are going to be superior in the Honda, just thanks to its design. Unfortunately for the Honda and for the off-road crowd, all the off-road things are going to be better in the 4Runner. It obviously has a 2-speed transfer case. You have a true low-ratio mode if you choose it. You can get a full-time 4-wheel drive system in the limited trim with a true center differential, etc. There are the TRD Pro versions, the TRD off-road versions, etc. There is just so much more capability available in the 4Runner. Next up, we have another very off-road capable entry and the best seller in this segment by an absolute landslide. It is the Jeep Grand Cherokee. 223,000 of those were sold last year, even though it is by far the most expensive one here. It starts at $38,290, which is ostensibly less than the Passport, but trust me, Jeep doesn't sell very many of those. Then it goes all the way up to $77,400 because the vast majority of Grand Cherokee shoppers are really shopping up there in the stratosphere pricing-wise. I think it's understandable. The Grand Cherokee comes across as America's Range Rover. It's comfortable, it's luxurious, I think it's styled well, the interior fittings and finishes are done very, very nicely. Obviously, reliability has not been Jeep's forte, but crafting a really world-class interior with lots of LCDs and stitched leather everywhere, that really has been their thing. Of course, you can also get it in rear-wheel drive, you can get it in four-wheel drive, you can get lockers, you can get adaptive air suspension. So if you're looking for more than 11 inches of ground clearance, but also a soft highway ride, if you want decent handling capability, but lots of off-road capability, you'll find all of those variants in the Grand Cherokee lineup. If you'd like stitched leather doors and a stitched leather dash, you'll find that too, but you're going to be paying almost double for that Grand Cherokee what you'll pay for a Passport. Next up, we have the Volkswagen Atlas, which is the most like the Passport really here, because the Volkswagen Atlas, I'm speaking of the Cross Sport, of course, is basically just an Atlas where they whacked a few inches off and deleted the third row. Pricing-wise, it also sticks pretty close to the formula here. It's a little bit less expensive at $38,065 starting. I think that has more to do, though, with its engine choice, because you can only get one engine now in the Atlas and the Atlas Cross Sport. It's a 2-liter 4-cylinder turbo, so a little low on the displacement for this category. 269 horsepower, 273 pound-feet of torque. It's not the most powerful engine here. It has an 8-speed automatic transmission, which is definitely nice and smooth. It's actually the same 8-speed that Toyota and Lexus use in a lot of their models. And it also has a really nicely redone interior. Volkswagen recently refreshed the Atlas and the Cross Sport models. They gave it a thorough interior refresh and a decent exterior tweak as well. I've always liked the sort of square slab-sided style in the Atlas, and I think the inside comes across as light and airy in a way that the top-end, especially versions of the Passport, definitely don't. The dark interior of the Passport isn't exactly my first choice here. In addition to the low starting price, we also have a roomy interior. It has about 2 inches more total legroom than we find in the Passport, and a cargo area that's about the same size. I know on the charts it looks smaller, looks 10 cubic feet smaller, but remember that Honda changed the way they're measuring the cargo area in the Passport. And previously it was around 40 cubic feet, they said. Now they're saying about 50 cubic feet. They're including some of the underfloor storage, and they've probably also adjusted the actual measurement method there. The other thing to keep in mind is that there's no overtly off-road version of the Atlas Cross Sport. Yeah, it's designed to be a little bit more off-roady. There's some off-road trims with some wheels and tires that change around a little bit, but we actually get a little bit less dedication to that off-road capability than we find in the Passport, and we certainly don't find that more capable rear axle. Next up, we have the Subaru Outback. It is the unusual one in this segment because it's the lowest price, $30,240 starting, and because it is, of course, a lifted station wagon. And that's really what Subaru has made their entire reputation on. The Outback was one of the best-selling Subarus for a long time, and now it's really just fighting for that particular title with the other Outback wagon in the lineup, I guess you'd say the Crosstrek. Basically the same formula, 2 different sizes. I think it's easy to see why the Outback is the third bestseller in this segment. It's very easy to live with. It has very car-like manners out on the road, but it has lots of ground clearance, over 9 inches, depending on the model that you get. It also has a very low roof height, so if you are doing off-roady, outdoorsy things, and you want to put a kayak or a bicycle or skis on top of your vehicle, it is just so much easier to load and unload the Outback because the roofline is considerably lower than the Passport. On the downside, you're probably going to need to put things on the roof because the interior is notably smaller. It is longer overall, but remember that it's not as boxy, not as upright, so we actually don't get quite as much storage volume on the inside. You'll really notice that in the cargo area, where the Passport's cargo area feels cavernous. It's a little bit tighter in the Outback. Even though Subaru is really pushing the Outback, especially the Outback Wilderness, at the outdoorsy crowd, the all-wheel drive system is definitely more capable in the Honda. We have that limited slip functionality, we have the torque vectoring functionality, and it's capable of sending more power to the rear axle than the Subaru Outback is. Subaru punches back with excellently designed software and, of course, the Wilderness trim with even more ground clearance. But if we're simply talking about off-road capability and all-wheel drive capability, I would probably take the Passport before I took the Subaru. It's also worth noting that the Subaru is going to be less expensive. It tops out at $44,190, and that is definitely less than the Black Edition that we were testing here at essentially $50,000. If you're looking for the most off-road capable entry in this segment, it's going to be the 4Runner or the Jeep Grand Cherokee. If you're looking for luxury, that is certainly going to be the Jeep. If you're looking for an affordable price tag, that's going to be the Subaru. The Passport and the Atlas Crossport sort of slot in between. I really appreciate the interior updates that Volkswagen has given us in the Atlas for 2024, and that is exactly what I had hoped Honda would do with the Passport. Rather unfortunately, they did not. This does not get the new interior from the new Pilot, does not get the new platform from the new Pilot. We're still going to be waiting on those changes for at least a little while longer. I honestly wish that they had done a bit more with the interior, maybe some extra color options, etc., because the lighter colored interiors, especially in the Atlas, really make it feel like a more cheerful place to spend your time. But Honda has been very aggressive at tons of standard feature content, excellent pricing, and of course, a more reliable vehicle, generally speaking, than some of these other alternatives. Let me know what you think about that down there, and has Honda done enough for the 2024 Passport to keep it on your list? Or are you going to be waiting for the full redesign of the Passport whenever we finally get that in America? I'll see all of you later.
I wonder how many people would be offended if I did a Hail Mary, Mother of Grace, help me find some cargo space? No? No? Too much? Too soon?